Welcome to the Italian Wine Podcast. This episode is brought to you by Vinitaly International Academy, announcing the 24th of our Italian Wine Ambassador courses to be held in London, Austria, and Hong Kong from the 27th to the 29th of July. Are you up for the challenge of this demanding course? Do you want to be the next Italian Wine Ambassador? Learn more and apply now at vinitalyinternational.com.
Welcome to this special On the Road edition, hosted by Stevie Kim. Today, Stevie is in New York, interviewing Jane Brody, a pioneer in health and wellness journalism. Listen in to them discuss her career and life after 58 years of groundbreaking work at the New York Times.
This is a very, very special on-the-road edition, and we're in Brooklyn, New York. To be precise, we're in Park Slope with Jane Brody, an American journalist. For our audience who are less familiar, Jane, would you mind introducing yourself to our audience? Because our audience is very wine-centric, but also Italian, international, maybe not necessarily American. So how would you explain who you are?
Well, I am a retired now.
But just as of 1 week.
Right.
I mean, that's...
I have spent my entire career as a science journalist, which means I write about scientific topics, mostly health-related, and my goal was always to help people live healthier lives and get more out of life than they might otherwise if they didn't have the knowledge that I was trying to give them.
When did you start your writing career, and where did you start?
I started my writing career right out of my graduate degree in science journalism at the Minneapolis Tribune in Minnesota. And after 2 years there, I got a job at the New York Times doing full-time science writing with a focus on health. And I got the job by convincing the Times that they weren't telling people enough that they needed to know to live good lives. And they asked me, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, for example, if somebody has epilepsy, in those days, in the 1960s, if you had epilepsy, you couldn't drive, you couldn't marry, you couldn't go do a whole ton of things that normal people would be able to do, even if your epilepsy was totally under control. And so I said, you need to tell people that life is possible, normal life is possible, so that the rules get changed and so that people with this condition can live healthier. Well, on the basis of that little story, I got my job at the New York Times. And I've been there since 1964. And in 1976, they asked me to write a weekly column, which really made a national reputation. It was the first column in a newspaper that was devoted to health service journalism on health. And nobody else was doing this at the time. They wrote gee whiz stories about the latest health discovery, the latest, medicine, the latest fancy doctor, whatever. But nobody was really writing information that would help people live healthier. And so that's the job that I acquired at the behest of an editor at the New York Times. It was interesting because the column originally started in the food section.
Aha.
And, where they ran food and wine and all those things and the editor wanted something that he considered more serious in that section. And so he came up with this idea to do a health column, and he asked me to do it. And I fought tooth and nail because I didn't want to be saddled with something I had to do every week. But he said, try it for 3 months. And after 3 months, you can come back and we'll discuss it. In 3 months, I came back. It was such a runaway hit from the very first weeks.
What were your first, columns?
Well, this is interesting. I had to write 4 columns before they published one. They wanted to see what they were going to be like. And because the deal I made with them is that I wanted to be allowed to write about any topic, health-related topic, that I thought was important.
So you had carte blanche, like free reign to.
That's correct. I was not saddled with anything, but I put them to a true test. Now, mind you, this was 1976. The New York Times was considered the good gray lady, which meant it was very old-fashioned. But the first 4 columns that I wrote, which they wanted to see before they ran even one of them, I included a column on impotence
Aha.
to put them through.
No, when was this? What
This
year?
was 1976.
Okay.
Erectile dysfunction didn't exist then as a phrase.
Right.
Not even in medicine was it used.
Oh, really?
No. That comes way
So
later.
you came out with this topic.
I wanted to see if they were going to stick to their word that I could write about any topic.
Right. And so they allowed you to write about
They
that.
swallowed hard, and they published it.
And what was the reaction?
Well, it was like mind-blowing to people. But I became what my colleagues used to call the sex editor of the New York Times. I wrote about topics like impotence, like frigidity, which is the other thing. The female version of impotence was called frigidity. Mm-hmm. Nobody says that now anymore either.
Right.
But I got words into the newspaper that had never been published in the New York Times. Words like penis.
Right.
When Masters and Johnson wrote their seminal work called Human Sexual Response, they referred to the female organ as a vagina and the male organ as the male sexual organ. They never used the real word for this male sexual organ.
And what year was this?
1970. Oh, this
When
Masters
you
and
used
Johnson,
the word penis.
Yes, and I used the word penis. I said, okay.
You are the first journalist who used the word penis?
In the New York Times.
Right.
They published
Amazing.
it. I also was the first to get the word sexual intercourse on the page 1 of the New York Times.
How did they describe it prior to that?
God only knows.
That's amazing.
And the other phrase that I was famous for, there was a study done by a woman named Cher Height about women's sexual response, in which she showed that a very large percentage of the majority of women do not reach orgasm with just what she called penile thrusting.
Right.
Well, that made me world famous, that getting penile thrusting into the New York Times. And one of the editor who had me writing this column said, they don't really want to run this. And I said, well, show your wife. He took it home. He took the article home, showed it to his wife, who said, do you realize how many divorces happen because men don't know this?
Right. So you had some alliance.
The wife of one of the major editors in the newsroom. I mean, he was always on my side, but he had higher ups also to deal with.
So in the end, how many years have you worked for New York Times?
How many years?
Yeah, how many years?
I started in 1964.
Right.
And I just finished now in 2022.
Yeah, so 58 years.
Yeah, 58 years. 58
Wow.
years.
Is that a record for New York Times?
I don't know. Honestly, don't know.
Right.
I don't really know. Most people now are not sticking around that long. They're really not. Any time that I thought about quitting, I said, why would I quit? I have the best job in journalism that you could have. And before I wrote all this health stuff, I also wrote a lot of natural history, and I loved that. That was my passion. So I wrote about everything from crows to bears to frogs to environments like peat bogs, stuff like that. And I made up assignments for myself that got me to places that I wanted to go to.
Were there a lot of women?
I was the only woman in my department for a long time, except for the so-called secretary.
So your department meaning?
Science News.
How many were there? Others?
There were about
Other
7
writers.
of us and just one woman. And then eventually they hired another woman, but they moved her to Washington. They didn't really want her there. You know, women came into science, to health journalism. Women came into health journalism because men weren't doing it. There was an open door.
Weren't doing it because they were uninterested, or?
It wasn't the scene yet.
Right.
Believe it or not, a lot of things that we talk about now that seem so normal in health issues were never, ever written about anywhere. Maybe in some of the women's magazines. The men wanted to write gee whiz stuff. the discovery of heart transplants.
Right,
the,
right.
You know, something
Big splashy.
big splashy things, and
Right.
but nobody was writing the kind of stuff that the women. When we went to science writing seminars and health issues related to health issues, the vast majority of the journalists were women, because that was the field we could go into without a competition. You know, we didn't have to kick a man out of a job in order to get one, which was a big deal. And it's an interesting history, actually, of science journalism. And, you know, the men caught on because it was very popular.
So, because also your column was syndicated, right?
Well, they weren't syndicated in the sense that I got paid for every newspaper that ran.
But probably New York Times.
The New York Times had what they call a news service, and when many newspapers bought the New York Times news service,
right,
and they could run anything that the Times put out.
Okay.
But the people who wrote that stuff did not get paid for it, unlike syndicated columnists who got paid for it.
Okay, that's the difference then.
Yeah. So we just got straight salary.
So in reality, your audience, your readers are from the entire country, not
That's correct.
Exclusively,
They're not
territorial.
Exclusively anywhere.
Thank you for listening to Italian Wine Podcast. We know there are many of you listening out there, so we just want to interrupt for a small ask. Italian Wine Podcast is in the running for an award, the Best Podcast Listening Platform, through the Podcast Awards, the People's Choice. Listener nominations is from July 1st to the 31st, and we would really appreciate your vote. We are hoping our listeners will come through for us, so if you have a second and could do this small thing for us, just head to ItalianWinePodcast.com from July 1st to the 31st and click the link. We thank you, and back to the show.
So how did you keep up with did you have like a rapport with your readers?
Oh, well,
do they write to you?
Oh, yes. I mean, you realize this started long before there was an internet.
Right.
Long before we had even a word processor, let alone a computer. The really fun story about this is that when the Times introduced word processors into the newsroom, they did a very smart thing. They brought it for the first trial into the science department, because they figured science writers would be less afraid of these toys than the rest of the reporters who were used to writing, on a yellow pad.
Was that true though?
Oh, yes.
I would think so.
Oh, yes.
So when was even word processor invented?
You'd have to look it up, because I don't really know, but I do know that my sons grew up with them, because I remember. Well,
are you sure?
No. They were about 10 or 11 or 12. They were young, maybe 11.
Yeah.
When they decided to add memory to the word processor. I was hysterical. I was afraid they were going to break this thing. They took the back off it and added stuff inside it and closed it up again.
Who was that? Eric or Lauren?
Eric and Lauren, both of them.
Both of them.
Yeah. So, they were, maybe that's 40 years ago now, more than 40.
So how did you keep up with the correspondences with your readers?
Well, they
sent like a letter. You get a box full of letters.
They sent letters. I got mail all the time.
And did you reply to all of them?
I replied to a lot of them, but I couldn't reply to all of them. I didn't have a secretary.
You didn't have help. Not even like interns or anything like that.
Not to answer my mail. There were interns who would occasionally do some Xeroxing for you.
Right.
That was what we did, Xeroxing. If I wanted to save a journal article, for example, in a file, we had to Xerox it and file it.
So did you always, like, from the get-go, you had to physically go to the office?
Oh, yes.
Was that correct?
Yes. Physically go to the office 5 days a week. And yes, you could do some stuff in between, but mostly it was just in office work. It was all in office work, unless you were on the road researching something, and then it wasn't inside the office. But all the writing took place basically on a typewriter. until we got word processors.
Right, right.
But the interesting thing about the word processors, they introduced it into the science department, and within a few days, we were so excited about this toy that we could, we used to, if you needed to make a change in your copy, you had to start over again and retype it. Whereas with the word processor,
Right.
you could just stick it in where you wanted it and move stuff around. And so we were like proselytizers for the newsroom. All the science writers would go around saying, "You're not going to believe how great this is."
Right, right, right. You're like the evangelist.
But there was a downside to all of this, and that is that they used to crash. I lost a whole chapter of a book that I was writing when the word processor crashed. Who the hell knows what goes on inside them? But I could never retrieve it.
So listen, that's a good segue to books, your books.
Mm-hmm.
So you didn't only write for New York Times, you also wrote books.
And that happened.
When did that start?
That happened because within 3 years of my writing the columns, so 1979 now, publishers wanted to publish a book of the columns. And the Times said no.
Oh, they say no.
They owned it. They owned them. They said, if anyone is going to publish it, we will. But what happened was that the primary publisher, W.W. Norton, who really wanted me to write for them. And they said, well, we don't just want your columns. We want Jane Brody, author. And so what will you write? What book would you write for us? I said, I don't know. And they said, well, what's your most popular column topic? And I said, nutrition.
And that's when you wrote the nutrition.
And that's when I wrote the nutrition book. They said, okay. And that was a bestseller. And then I got letters from readers of the book asking me, okay, you told us how we should eat. Now tell us what to make. And so then I wrote the Good Food Book, which is a book of recipes.
How long did it take you to write the nutrition book?
Yeah, 1 calendar year. I wrote 2 chapters a month. Don't ask. It was insane.
Wow.
I would get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and I would write for an hour and a half. Then I'd go out and do my jog, and then I would come back and get my kids out, give them their breakfast, get them out to school, and then get myself together and get to the work.
So you not only preach good health, good way of living, you also practiced, right?
Always.
And you are a true believer in what you say. So tell
I'm
us
a
a
true
little bit.
believer,
You're
and I'm
a little bit
evidence.
fanatical, I have to be honest.
No, I don't.
Because I don't have that discipline. I don't think many people do. But give me your typical
I would
routine.
I do not consider myself fanatical, except that I do believe you should not be making the decision every day to exercise. You just do it. I don't wake up in the morning and say, oh, I don't feel like going out today. Maybe I'll just sleep an extra hour and a half. And
that's like 99% of people.
Well, this is what I've been trying to tell them all these years, that that's not the way to live. Because every bit of evidence says we evolved on the move. We have to keep moving if we want to keep living. Mm-hmm. And that's a given. There was a fellow who lived across the street from me who retired. He was a bricklayer or something like that. He retired and he just sat in the house, and before I knew it, he was in a wheelchair. I mean, that's not what your body is meant to do. One of my favorite quotes now from a doctor I know said, sitting is the new smoking. I mean, obviously we sit. We have to sit. We sit at our jobs. And most of us sit at jobs.
Absolutely.
Very few people have physically active jobs, and fewer and fewer with time, because those kinds of jobs are being taken over by robots.
Give me your typical schedule.
My typical schedule is my alarm goes off at 5:30.
Every day.
Yeah, I have a dog. Dog has to go out. I want to do my little ablutions before I take him out. I'm out with him between 7 and 7:30 every morning, and we come back about 8:30, give him his breakfast, and then I go off to the pool and swim. I go to a YMCA every day. In the summer when I'm not here, I swim somewhere else, but I swim every day.
How long do you swim for?
Well,
And you're just doing laps?
I'm doing laps. Yeah, I'm swimming laps. I swim at least a half an hour and sometimes 40 to 45 minutes, depending upon the nature of the day and the nature of the pool and whatever.
Weren't you afraid? And you did this even during COVID, or the pools were closed?
Well, everything closed down from mid-March 2020. The Y opened its pools on October 1st, 2020, with very strict protocols. And everybody had his own lane, and they even varied where you got into the pool so that you didn't get in you weren't next to anybody else. I mean, this was before anyone had a vaccine. Well,
But you still went to the pool.
I signed up immediately as soon as they made it possible. And
But what did you do from March to October?
we tried. At first, we tried. My pool friends and I tried biking. We have a nice park right near my house, and so we bike around the park. It was so cold. It was cold in March, and they gave up. So I walked more, and I just did whatever I could. You know, if you have stairs, that's a very good kind of exercise. You can just run up and down the stairs. Then I always run up and down the stairs, so it's nothing unusual for me to do.
And then you go to the pool, and that's it now? Because when I met you first time, you were crazy about power walking, right?
Well, we weren't power walking in the sense that nobody. I don't remember what year that was, but we walked every morning.
Yeah, I guess it was before.
We walked at 6 o'clock. My friends are still walking at 6 o'clock.
Yeah.
And then I got the dog, and it was really difficult to get everything in. The 6 o'clock and the dog, and then the pool, and then and then work. And then my knees got bad. I played a lot of tennis.
Right.
I played a ton of tennis. I used to play tennis every day. And when my knees got replaced, I guess. No, I still walked. I walked after that, but it really became a problem. Walking became a problem.
So listen, Jane, I want to talk about your latest book. So the nutrition, the recipes, the food kind of book. After all those hugely successful books, you wrote Guide to the Great Beyond. What is this, and why did you write?
Well, read the subtitle out loud.
It says, a practical primer to help you and your loved ones prepare medically, legally, and emotionally for the end of life.
See, it occurred to me that, and I wasn't old when I wrote that. I mean, it was 2009, I think, that things happened to them, and they weren't prepared to deal with them. They didn't have anything in place. They didn't have directions for doctors as to how I should be treated if such and such happens to me. Not everybody wants the be all and end all of medicine. Some people say, you know what, if I get to this point, I don't want you to do anything. That's the kind of information that I felt people should have, and they should understand what their options are and how to make use of them and how to put them in place. And so this is a very practical book to help people cope with their own and their families and their loved ones' issues.
So it's both for let's say the elders, but also their family.
It's for everybody. And believe me, if you're 18 years old or older, you should have put in place the information that's in that book. Because before you're 18, your parents make the decision. But after 18, you have the right to make your own decision. And so it's really important. And, my husband died a year after that book was published, 2010, and we used the information. I mean, he had already told me when he was diagnosed with a metastatic cancer that he did not want any fancy treatment. And so following the diagnosis, we just said exactly that. This is what you want. This is what you're going to get. And his body was left to science so that medical students could practice on him. That's what he wanted.
Right.
And it wasn't my decision. I mean, I would have made the same decision, but it was his decision, and we just put it into practice. And that's what I'm telling people in that book, is the person whose life you are managing has a right to say what they want out of life. I interviewed another journalist whose husband had advanced Parkinson's disease to the point where he couldn't do anything for himself. And he just did not want to live that way. And she had to follow what he wanted, and she did. When he said, I've had it, and the only legal way to end his life where he lived was to stop eating and drinking. So that's what he did. She said it was very difficult to watch, but it was in his honor. And that's really it. We honor your loved one's wishes, and I think it's really important.
So are you religious or spiritual?
No, I would say I'm spiritual in the sense that I believe that people should have a joy of life. I mean, I'm a very here and now person. I don't believe in a hereafter. I don't think we're going anywhere. I don't think anyone's going to look after us once we're gone from this earth. And I am a spiritual person, but I have not been a religious person for a very long time. I think I was raised as a Jew. I went to Hebrew school. I even was fluent in Hebrew at one point. But when I married a man who wasn't Jewish and no rabbi would consider marrying us, I said,
Richard was agnostic. No.
Well, he became agnostic, but he was raised as a Lutheran. And definitely, he was much more of a churchgoer than I ever was of a synagogue goer. I love the rituals of Judaism, but I practice it.
So listen, Jane, I'm going to ask you one last question because, you know, I'm wine-centric. And you're a science journalist. So what is your opinion about wine and health?
Well, there's no question that if you look at the study, it's very, very straightforward. Alcohol in general makes a U-shaped curve. If you don't drink it all, you're over here on the curve. If you drink 1 glass a day, your risk of death goes way down. But if you get to more than 2 or 3, it goes way up.
Per day?
Yes. So 1 glass a day of especially wine, but alcohol in general makes this J-shaped curve. Like that. Of all the alcohols, wine is the most beneficial. And red wine is especially the most beneficial.
Now what will you do with your time? All your extra time?
I haven't made a commitment yet.
Right.
I'm thinking about writing essays, and because it's hard to take the writing out of a writer.
Yeah.
It's just in my blood. It's what I've done all my life. Very hard for me to just sit back and say, okay, I'm not going to write anymore.
But you just told me in the very beginning when I got here, it's like, this is the last book you would have written.
I'm not going to do another book.
So no more books?
I don't really want to. The publishing industry is too challenging now.
I agree.
And I just don't want to do another book. I don't want to deal with all the rigmarole that's involved in doing a book. And it's a lot of rigmarole. You have to be passionate about it. I was very passionate about this. I thought of the title of this book when I was swimming. I had thought about doing this book for 2 years before that. But when I thought of the title, I said, okay, I guess I got to do it. I have to do it. But I don't have that kind of, I have to be passionate about the subject. Otherwise, I won't do it. But at the moment, I don't really want to write a book. And I don't think I will. I may write some essays. I like the kinds of essays that I would do if I was giving a lecture, which I'll be giving my last lecture in a week.
Whereabouts?
Actually, Wednesday. No, it's some organization asked me to do a talk on.
Because you used to travel a lot.
I did. I traveled a lot
As a speaker.
I'm so glad I don't have to do that anymore. I really am. I have a whole cabinet of just travel preparations. And I said, why am I saving this stuff?
Right. That's it. It's a wrap. That was Jane Brody.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Italian Wine Podcast, brought to you by Vinitaly Academy, home of the gold standard of Italian wine education. Do you want to be the next ambassador? Apply online at vinitalyinternational.com for courses in London, Austria, and Hong Kong, the 27th to the 29th of July. Remember to subscribe and like Italian Wine Podcast, and catch us on SoundCloud, Spotify, and wherever you get your pods. You can also find our entire back catalog of episodes at ItalianWinePodcast.com.
Hi guys, I'm Joy Livingston and I am the producer of the Italian Wine Podcast. Thank you for listening. We are the only wine podcast that has been doing a daily show since the pandemic began. This is a labor of love and we are committed to bringing you free content every day. Of course, this takes time and effort, not to mention the cost of equipment, production, and editing. We would be grateful for your donations, suggestions, requests, and ideas. For more information on how to get in touch, go to ItalianWinePodcast.com.